Welcome back to Spiritwind. I'm Pam Hart, and we have this discussion every month about Spiritwind, which is a study group for spiritual adventurers. Again today I have my guest, Rick Reich, and he teaches a class on Spiritwind every week at Unity of Auburn at 5:30 on Wednesdays. And everyone is invited. This isn't an exclusive class at all. Everyone is invited to come. So we're kind of touching on topics that we touch on during our discussions at Spiritwind. In May, we talked about women philosophers, and in June, we'll be talking about men's spirituality. So that will be our topic for today also. Rick, tell us a little bit about how people can reach you.
Well, they can reach me mainly through my email, which would be, it's actually R. Kuykendall, KUYKENDALL @minister.com. And I'm also on Reddit and YouTube under Spiritwind. So they can reach me there, those places as well.
Well, this last month of May, we talked about women philosophers.
Yes.
And our last program, we touched on about 3 of the women philosophers. And I thought we would just touch on one more, just as kind of a review of what we did last month.
Sure.
And one of the ones that you talked about with us was Ayn Rand. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you would like to tell us a little bit more about her and why you chose her.
Okay. Well, I chose her mainly because she is a very well-known woman writer. Many don't know that she was actually a philosopher. In fact, her real name was Elisa Rosenbaum. She was a Russian-born American. She changed her name to Ayn Rand. And she was a writer, and she achieved her first success with her novel The Fountainhead in 1943. And then she wrote her best-known work, which was Atlas Shrugged, in 1957. And after she wrote Atlas Shrugged, she turned her attention and writing towards her own philosophy, which she called objectivism.
And objectivism is having to do with reason and making sure that things fit?
Yeah, well, in her own, this is just a quote from her own writing. She says, objectivism is the concept of man as a heroic being, with his own happiness as the moral purpose of his life, with productive achievement as his noblest activity, and reason as his only absolute. She laid out her philosophy under, these are traditional philosophical heads if you're writing systematically about philosophy, and we won't talk about them all, but she put her philosophy under the headings of metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, political philosophy, and aesthetics. Aesthetics being the study of what is beautiful and so forth. So we're just going to look at 3 real quick so you get an idea of what her philosophy was like. So when it comes to metaphysics, she was a realist, and she was opposed to anything mystical or metaphysical, including all forms of religion. So she was against all forms of religion and opposed anything metaphysical, or supernatural, I should say. In terms of epistemology, which is a part of philosophy that deals with theories of knowledge and how we know things, she said that everything we know is based on sense perception alone, period. What we gather through our five senses is all that we know, that things like intuition, instinct, tacit knowledge, or having just a form of knowing, that's all just ridiculous and means nothing. And then in ethics, she argued for totally to self-interest. And she was against, she condemned ethical altruism, which is doing things out of love and concern for others. And in fact, she wrote a whole book on that called The Virtue of Selfishness. So she presents a very interesting figure in the history of philosophy. And in fact, she even said at the towards the end, she said, she made the remark that the history of philosophy, in the history of philosophy, she could recommend only 3 A's: Aristotle, Aquinas, and Ayn Rand. So, anyway, so that's enough of her.
So she was really into the ego
Yes,
and the self,
yes,
and using the self for reasoning.
right.
And then the reasoning was
Only sense.
the only thing man needed for spirituality was what he could reason himself.
And I think that she even condemned spirituality because it wasn't of reason. You know, so just flat reason. It's kind of like that old Dragnet program, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. You know.
That's great. Well, then let's launch into our new topic that we chose for our June. And you said you chose women philosophers for May because of Mother's Day, and so now June has Father's Day in it.
Right.
So.
And so I chose men's spirituality.
Oh, great.
I'm doing this month based on a book that's written by Matthew Fox. It's titled The Hidden Spirituality of Men. And what this is about is, you know, if we look back to the 60s, we see that there was the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, and later gay movement, and these different movements were happening in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, and I guess men kind of felt left out of the whole thing, you know. And so there was a poet by the name of Robert Bly, and he wrote a book called Iron John, a book about men. And a bunch of men read that book, and he started, along with 2 other guys, Michael Meade and Robert Moore, these men started making these men's events, you know, where you would go for a men's retreat for a weekend or for a few days or whatever. And, but it was a whole different approach to masculinity, because in the past, you know, I guess when you'd have a men's gathering, it'd be more like drinking beer and watching a game or something like that. Mm-hmm. And men stayed in their kind of stereotypical roles and in the way they act towards people and so forth. But Bly saw to it, this is Robert Bly, the poet again, he saw into the heart of Western culture, being both masculine and feminine, and he was trying to point in a direction of healing and reconciliation between the sexes, the genders, between men and women, so that men would relate to women more in a way that they felt they wanted to be related to, and so forth. And one of these, Robert Bly, Michael Meade, and Robert Moore wrote a book called King warrior, magician, and lover, rediscovering the archetypes of the mature masculine.
You want to talk about archetypes here for a minute? What archetypes are?
Yes, I'm going to talk about archetypes. Now, because that's going to become important in a moment, because Mead points out 4 archetypes for men, whereas Matthew Fox in his books points out 8 archetypes for men. Now, what an archetype is to me the best way to explain it is to explain what a prototype is. Now, that's easier to understand. A prototype is like when they're going to come up with an idea for a new airplane. Mm-hmm. They'll first make a model of it before they even start building a plane. Mm-hmm. And the model becomes the prototype of what they're making. So the model is not the plane, but a example of what the plane should be. Now, archetypes are, it's a term that was popularized by Carl Jung, the psychologist and who had worked with Sigmund Freud, and he saw them as archetypes as being universal patterns of things. For instance, just as the model of the plane was the prototype of an actual plane, that these archetypes such as the mother, the great mother, was a archetype of what true motherhood was, or the grandfathers were a representative of what true grandfathers were. And there's different kinds of, like the wise one is another archetype, and even monsters are archetypes, that kids see in dreams and so forth. But anyway, the archetypes that Matthew Fox uses in his book, which I said he uses 8, he uses the hunter, the spiritual warrior, the husband, the father, the grandfather, Father Sky, the green man, and the prophet. And we thought we'd talk about 3 of these, I think.
Right. And so which ones did more layout in his book? You said he had 4 archetypes that he was...
He had a king and...
right.
Yeah, he had king and other ones. And I had read his book and studied it as well. It's a very good book. It's just Matthew Fox thought of different ones, so I was exploring other archetypes as well. So anyway, I thought I'd just focus on 3 of his to kind of give an example of what we'll be doing this month.
Okay. And so an archetype then is a pattern or a universal symbol.
Right. And so like the first archetype I'm looking at is the hunter.
Okay.
So we're not talking about we can think of an archetype of a hunter, and we have in our mind image of that. We can see a guy with his camouflage clothes on and his shotgun and, whatever he has with him. So we have an image of what a hunter looks like in our mind, even though we don't see a hunter at this moment. And that's what an archetype is. But the archetype that Matthew Fox is talking about is the earliest hunter, which were the hunter-gatherers. And that's what is the archetype of all hunters, because they were the first. And in fact, he points out that for 90% of human history, we were hunter-gatherers. It's only been recently that we're not, and yet, in a way, we still continue to be hunter-gatherers. but we do our hunting at the supermarket.
Well, would you say a hunter is also one who is hunting for the job then,
Yes,
too?
yes,
Because he's still having to bring something home, I guess.
right. My dad used to say, bring home the bread or bring home the bacon,
Yeah.
you know, as work. So work in itself, for modern humans, became going to work each week. And it was by bringing home the money that you were able to go out and hunt in the grocery stores, you know, if you look at it that way. But there's even a more important form of hunting, and that's the hunting for spiritual food.
Mm.
And, you know, how it was among hunter-gatherers, it was the man, the husband, the father, who went out to hunt, while the women gathered, you know, fruits and berries and, you know, whatever else they could find. So it was a team effort that both did. But then in the home, families need to be spiritually fed as well. They don't just, you know, like Jesus says, man does not live by bread alone. And that's true. People need to be spiritually fed, emotionally fed, and everything as well. And when you look at churches in the past, and well, even now, any church, I was a minister for over 30 years, and I've just seen over the years that there's a predominance of women in churches rather than men. And so if they're going to be the hunter, the one who brings home the spiritual food for the family, there's kind of a calling to men, not necessarily that they have to start going to church, but somehow they have to start taking up their responsibility in the spiritual direction of their families, to be a spiritual source in their family and not just a money source, you know.
So Matthew Fox talks about this in his book.
Yeah. And so the next one was I was going to look at as spiritual warrior. And spiritual warriors is, Matthew Fox in the book makes a big difference between a soldier and a warrior. And he says they're not the same. And it seems like they're synonymous, but if you listen to why he says they're different, you can understand why. And the main difference is a soldier does what he's told to do, period. That's why you end up with unquestioning obedience. And that's what the worst example of that was the Nazi war crimes, where everyone's just saying, I was just obeying orders, I'm just obeying orders. Soldiers are taught to not think for themselves, to only react and do what they're told to do. On the other hand, spiritual warriors, or just warriors in general, if you think of the Native American warriors and so forth, they do not what they're commanded to do. They do what they want to do or they feel they need to do, and they stand up and do it regardless of the consequences. And so I'm going to show you the difference, contrast of some soldiers versus some warriors. Soldiers, Napoleon, Ulysses S. Grant, George Patton, Colin Powell, those are soldiers. Warriors are people like Jesus, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, the Dalai Lama. They are people that have been fighting, but they fight spiritual battles rather than physical battles. And so the point is that while we honor our soldiers, we must be spiritual warriors as well in the line of like those people that I mentioned, like the Dalai Lama and Nelson Mandela and all these people. What's interesting is in the Old French, in Old French language, the word courage comes from Old French, and it literally means big heart. And so courage isn't the one that is fearless and, kill without batting an eye.
Ah, right.
Courage is having a big heart, that's what the word really means.
Take risks, maybe, for the greater good.
Right. When you say risk, that reminds me of last month. We had one of the women philosophers who based her whole philosophy on risks, just believing that you can't get through life without having to take risks, and she ended up dying taking a risk, saving 2 kids' life that were drowning in the Mediterranean. She saved their lives, but she died herself. Anyway, the last archetype I was going to share is Father Sky. That's an ancient one. We talk about Father Sky, Mother Earth, Father Sky, and so forth. In almost every culture in the world refers to Mother Earth, Father Sky. But it's interesting, there's a few that don't. And one...
We have it switched around.
Yeah. Egyptians, in Egyptian mythology, Nut, or Nut, depending on how you pronounce it, was the sky goddess. And it has her arched like a rainbow over the earth. And Geb was her partner, which was a male, and he was the earth god. So, but be that as it may, in most cultures, it's Father Sky. And so, and in fact, in Judeo-Christian culture, we refer to our Father who art in heaven, and we even think that when Jesus was resurrected, he ascended to heaven, going up into the sky. And it's interesting, and you have, of course, Native Americans all refer to Mother Earth and Father Sky, But what happened during the Enlightenment period, which was like in the late 1600s and 1700s, up to the early 1800s, where science was coming in and all that, Isaac Newton was a predominant figure, and he saw the sky not anymore as Father Sky. It was a mechanistic machine that had these planets that moved according to pathways and in a very machine-like kind of way. When you contrast that with what we know today, what we've seen with the Hubble telescope, what we've seen especially lately with the James Webb telescope about what the universe looks like and everything, it is definitely not a machine. It's like an organism that's alive. And so we are re-divinizing the sky, making it holy again by just recognizing with awe and wonder the magnificence that God has made,
And so, as Father Sky as an archetype, what conditions in man do you see that expresses that?
Well, I can see what doesn't express it.
Okay.
In that, for instance, if part of which I believe, and it's a part of the Bible, it teaches that God made us as stewards of the earth. God made us over the things on earth, and that means we are stewards of the sky, of Father's sky. And what have we been doing to Father's sky? Pollution and stuff that's causing global warming and all these kind of things, and climate change and everything else. We've depleted the ozone layer that protects us from ultraviolet lights. It causes skin cancer like I got on my head. And so those things tell us that combining two of the archetypes, being spiritual warriors for Father Sky, means at least being to some extent, whatever extent we can be, activists on the side of trying to make the sky a better place, better air for us to breathe. I can remember as a child in LA in the 50s, my lungs hurt, literally hurt breathing the air. And just with the smog laws that have been made since my childhood, our air's a lot better. But it's certainly not where it should be.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I bet that we'll have a lot more interesting discussions about this at our Spiritwind meetings in June on the Wednesdays at 5:30 at Unity of Auburn. And then what happens, sometimes there's a fifth Wednesday of the month. Do you continue with the lesson of the month?
No. What we do is whenever we have a month that has 5 Wednesdays, on the 5th Wednesday we do a special topic.
Okay.
And it's just a one-night deal. And so this coming Wednesday evening we will be doing a whole class. It's a survey of Buddhism, its origin in history and so forth, teachings.
Now that could probably use a whole month on its own too.
Yeah, it could too, yeah.
Well, thank you, Rick.
But thank you.
I think this has been a really good taste of what's coming up in June, and I thank you again.
Well, thank you.